Chapter 10. My horrified scream echoed through the kitchen. "April, what's wrong?" Jenny cried shrilly from the stove. She dropped the tea kettle onto the burner and hurried to the table. Ken dived around the table and grabbed my shoulders. "Are you okay?" he demanded. "What's wrong?" I pointed to the sliding door with a trembling finger. "Did you see it?" I stammered. "Something fell. I saw it fall. From the roof." Tony got to the door first. He pressed his face against the glass and peered out into the darkness. He stood there for a long time without moving. "See it?" I asked in a hushed whisper. "Tony, can you see it?" "I don't see anything, April," he called back to me. Carly pressed beside him, her blue eyes narrowed in concern. Jenny hurried to the door too. "It was a big clump of snow," Jenny reported. She stepped away from the glass door and turned back to me. "Are you okay? That's all you saw? Just snow?" "Yeah, blew down off the roof," Tony said. He rolled his eyes. "You're losing it," he murmured. I slumped over the table. I'm really sorry," I said. "I'm so worried about Dara and Josh. I guess I could feel my face turning red. I felt like a total jerk. I could see all of them, even Jenny, staring at me as if it were some kind of mental case. April is really messed up. April is starting to see things. That's what they were all thinking. "Hey, no big deal. We're all worried about Dara and Josh," Tony said, turning to stare out at the falling snow. "But they're okay. I know they are. I know Dara," he added dryly. "Dara is always okay." We made ham and turkey sandwiches for lunch, but none of us really felt much like eating. The wind continued to howl, and the snow hurtled down, sheet after sheet of it. The lights in the house flickered, then dimmed, but they didn't go out. Jenny and I searched for candles, just in case. We found a box of them in a linen closet and put them on the coffee table in the living room. I felt so stressed out and scared. Every sound made me jump. I wanted to cover my ears from the howling wind. Jenny, Ken, and I found a deck of cards and settled down on the living room couch to play gin rummy, just to take our minds off the fact that we were waiting to hear from Dara and Josh. Gin rummy is such a boring game, and I think there were some cards missing from our deck. "We're not playing with a full deck," Ken declared, his idea of a joke. Jenny and I groaned. Tony and Carly were in the kitchen. They said they wanted to make popcorn, but I think they were making out. They couldn't keep their hands off each other for more than a few minutes. Jenny yawned. "Want to do something else?" I asked. "Anything but truth or dare," Ken snapped. He flashed me a meaningful glance. So he did figure out what I meant last night, I realized. Ken knows that I know about the girl on Sumner Island. "Get some music on the radio?" Jenny suggested. "Yeah, good idea. It's too quiet in here," Ken said. He climbed to his feet and started to cross the room when we heard the knocking. Loud knocking. I jumped to my feet. "It's coming from the back," I cried. "It must be Dara and Josh." The three of us bolted to the kitchen. Tony and Carly had already reached the door. As I entered the kitchen behind Ken and Jenny, they were peering out into the back. "Who's there?" I called eagerly. "Is it Dara and Josh?" Tony turned away from the door, a puzzled expression on his face. "It's no one," he replied. "No one there." "But we heard knocking," Jenny said, joining Tony and Carly at the door. "So did we," Carly told her. "But take a look for yourself. There's no one out there." How weird, I thought. What made that sound? I knew we hadn't imagined it. Ken turned to Tony. "Did you do it?" he accused. "Another joke to scare us?" "Excuse me." Tony's mouth dropped open. "No way, man," he declared. "I'm as worried about Dara as you are. I'm not pulling any dumb jokes." Ken studied Tony's face for a moment, then turned back to me. The three of us made our way back to the living room. "We need a fire in here," I murmured, lowering myself into a leather armchair and gazing at the dark fireplace. "Maybe we should all go out and collect firewood," Ken replied. "At least it would give us something to do. The woodshed is probably—" He stopped when the knocking started again. Loud pounding on the door from the back of the house. Once again, we raced to the kitchen. Carly and Tony stood by the door, puzzled frowns on their faces. "No one there," Tony reported. "No one." Chapter 11. "Someone had to be knocking," Ken said, scratching the back of his head. "We heard it plain as day." Once again he stared accusingly at Tony. Tony swept a hand back through his wavy hair. He sighed. "Carly and I heard it too, but take a look. There's no one out there." "Maybe the wind is blowing something against the house," Jenny suggested. Or maybe it's a window shutter banging in the wind? The house doesn't have window shutters, Tony told her. I stepped up to the door and pressed my forehead against the cool glass. The snow was tumbling down, billowing sheets of snow so thick I could barely see the backyard. I could barely see past the small back porch. No footprints, I reported. I turned to the driveway. It ended in a low carport on the side of the house, and no sign of Dora's Jeep. My voice caught in my throat as I said those words. No sign of anything. A chill ran down my back. I turned away from the window, and the knocking started again. One loud knock, then a second. I think it's coming from the back porch, I said, shielding my eyes with both hands, squinting against the snow to see better. It was like trying to see through cotton. The knocking repeated, a loud, steady banging from very close by. Oh, I see it, I cried. It's the ski locker, on the porch. Huh? Jenny pushed up beside me and stared out into the darkness. I pointed to the tall green metal locker on the side of the porch. See? The door has come loose. It's banging against the locker. Well, at least one mystery is solved, Jenny said, stepping back from the door. She let out a relieved sigh. Let's go close it, Ken urged. If we don't, the banging will drive us crazy. Just leave it, Jenny told him. We can close it after the snow stops falling. No, come on. Ken tugged her arm. I can't stand the noise. We don't all have to go out there, Tony protested. It won't take 5 of us to close a locker door. I'll go with you, I told Ken. I could use some cold, fresh air. Ken and I grabbed the first coats we saw, pulled them over our shoulders, and made our way out through the back door. As we stepped onto the back porch, the wind blew the falling snow into our faces, forcing us to shield our eyes. Wow, I feel as if I'm in one of those snow globes, Ken exclaimed. You know, the glass balls you shake and the snow floats in every direction? Yeah, it's so windy you can't tell if the snow is falling up or down, I agreed. Our boots sank into the deep, wet snow as we stepped over to the ski locker. The metal door banged hard against the locker. Then the wind blew the door open again. I brushed snow off my eyebrows and followed Ken to the locker. He reached for the door, but the wind blew it open farther. Ken and I both cried out, startled, as something toppled out of the ski locker and landed in the snow with a thud. No! A horrified wail escaped my throat as I stared down at a blue face under a tangle of streaked blonde hair, stared down at a stiff, lifeless body, stared down at Dara's frozen corpse. Chapter 12. I grabbed Ken's arm, held on tightly. My legs gave way. I felt myself start to sink into the snow, to sink into the white, to fall and fall and fall. Dara's blue eyes stared up at me accusingly. Her mouth was frozen open in a wide O of horror, of pain. The snow whirled around us, holding us in place, freezing Ken and me, freezing us like Dara, stiff, terrified. I felt my throat tighten. I'm trapped, I thought. Trapped inside a whirling white cyclone. Trapped with Dara. Trapped with Dara's dead body, her dead face, her dead eyes. Blue, so blue and cold. Her hair tossed and shivered in the wind, the only thing that moved. And then Ken suddenly pulled away from me. I thought I would fall forward onto Dara's blue corpse. But somehow I caught my balance. Ken bent over with a groan to examine Dara's body. Grabbing onto the collar of the parka, Ken slowly lifted up Dara's body slightly. Dara's head dropped backward. Squinting through the white gauzy curtain of snow, I saw the dark stain on the shoulder of her parka, the dark puddle of dried blood. Oh! Another cry escaped my throat as I saw the hatchet, buried between her shoulder blades, buried so deep that just a glint of the metal showed above the parka. Murdered. Dara was murdered with a hatchet. Dara, murdered in the snow, so cold she's blue. My stomach lurched. I started to gag. I stumbled off the porch, snow up over my boots. I bent over and started to vomit. Retching up the horror, my entire body heaved and trembled. I shut my eyes tight. I gasped in the cold, wet air, and felt Ken's hands, gentle on my shoulders, leading me back onto the porch. I heard the glass door sliding, felt him guide me back into the kitchen, felt the warmth, the aroma of popcorn. My body still trembling. I'll never be normal. The words forced their way through my mind. Never be normal again. What happened? Jenny asked. What's wrong with April? Dara's dead, Ken replied in a whisper. I heard shocked gasps. I heard Carly scream. I still couldn't see them. I could only see blue, Dara's blue face, her blue face, frozen in such horror, such pain. She's been murdered, Ken told them. More gasps and shrieks. I opened my eyes to see Jenny sobbing, tears already running down her cheeks, Tony comforting Carly. I leaned back against the wall, my knees still shaking, my legs so weak and rubbery. We've got to call the police, I choked out. Now. Tony gave Carly a meaningful glance. I knew he was worried about his parents finding out that he had sneaked up here with Carly for the weekend, but that didn't matter anymore. Dara had a hatchet in her back. Dara had been murdered. We have no choice now, I said to Tony. I didn't mean to scream, to sound so shrill, but I couldn't help it. I swallowed hard and held my breath to force down my nausea. Slumped at the table, Jenny buried her face in her hands. Her shoulders heaved up and down as she sobbed. Ken let out a sigh. April is right, he murmured. We have no choice. We have to call the police. Right away. We all cried out as a gust of wind blew through the kitchen. Ken and I had been so upset we hadn't closed the sliding door. I turned to the door. Lying stiffly in the snow, Dara stared in at us. Her unblinking blue eyes seemed to glare at me, accuse me. Her hair fluttered in the wind. A covering of snow had fallen over it, over the shoulders of the parka, over the blood-soaked shoulder. Close the door, I shrieked, covering my eyes with both hands. Close it! Ken pulled the door shut and turned the lock. Dara continued to stare in at us from the other side of the glass. I turned away, to find that Tony had moved to the wall phone. He held the receiver in one hand. Call them, I instructed him. Tony, call the police. He shook his head, a strange blank expression on his face. I'm sorry, he said softly. I can't. Chapter 13. Tony, what are you saying? I demanded. We can't call the police, he repeated, replacing the receiver. The line is dead. Huh? I cried. You mean? No dial tone at all, Tony said, shaking his head. The storm must have blown down the wires. But, I sputtered. We'll have to walk to town, Ken suggested, gazing out at the sky. The dark clouds appeared even lower. It could snow like this for days, I thought. My entire body convulsed in a cold shudder. I wrapped my arms around my chest, and, feeling weak and frightened, leaned back against the wall. Or ski. We could ski to town, Ken explained. We'd never make it, Carly said, tugging tensely at a strand of auburn hair. Not without a car, even if we made it down the hill. How far could we get in this blinding snowstorm? We'd freeze before we'd reach the ski slopes, let alone town. How far is town? I asked Tony. Couple of miles, he muttered. Maybe a mile past the slopes. There are some ski lodges before town, but I don't think we could get to them either. At least, not until the snow stops coming down so hard. Maybe we could hitch a ride with someone, I suggested. The idea was greeted by silence. What kind of a nut would be out driving today? Tony finally replied. He walked over to the refrigerator and pulled out a can of Coke. At least we've got enough food and supplies. But there's a murderer out there, I cried shrilly. We can't just sit here and do nothing. Someone killed Dara, and, oh! I clapped a hand over my mouth. Josh! In my horror over Dara, I had totally forgotten about him. What about Josh? I choked out. We're going to find his body too, aren't we? No, Carly shrieked. Please? We are, I insisted, shaking all over. Whoever killed Dara probably killed Josh too, and whoever it is out there. I pointed to the door. But there are no footprints, Carly protested. If someone was in the backyard and killed Dara and Josh, wouldn't there be footprints? Maybe the snow covered them up, Jenny said, wiping her tear-swollen cheeks. It's snowing so fast, footprints would disappear in minutes. She's right, Carly agreed. No, she's wrong, Tony said. He walked to the glass door and stared out. I couldn't bear to see Dara staring in at us, so I lowered my gaze to the floor. You and Carly are both wrong, Tony said to me. There's no killer waiting out there, because the killer was Josh. Excuse me? I cried. I felt dizzy. The floor seemed to be tilting first one way, then the other. I slid my back along the wall and lowered myself to a sitting position on the kitchen floor. It's obvious, Tony said, moving away from the door and sitting down at the table beside Carly. He took a long drink from the Coke can. Josh killed Dara. Then he drove away in Dara's Jeep. But why? I blurted out. Why would Josh kill Dara? Tony shrugged. Who knows? Ken stepped over to the phone and lifted the receiver to his ear. He sighed and set it back down. Still out. What are we going to do? Jenny wailed. We're trapped here. There are no other houses around. The snow is too deep to walk. It's snowing too hard to ski for help. We're trapped. We'll get some firewood. We'll keep a big fire going, Tony replied. We'll stay warm and comfortable. The snow will stop. The phone will be fixed. We'll be okay, Jenny. If we stay calm and don't panic, we'll all be okay. Let's search Josh's room, I suggested. I pulled myself to my feet. Let's see if we can find any clues there, anything at all. If Josh took his bag, then we know he killed Dara and drove away, Ken said. I can't believe Josh wasn't up in that bunk last night, Ken said, shaking his head. If only I wasn't such a heavy sleeper. His voice trailed off. All 5 of us trooped down the hall to the room he had shared with Josh. I clicked on the ceiling light and stepped into the middle of the large room. Outside, the sky had darkened to evening charcoal. The wind howled around the corners of the house. The room was chilly, colder than the other rooms, chilly and damp-smelling. Look, Josh's bag, I cried, pointing. The blue canvas bag stood beside the bunk bed. Ken and I dropped down onto our knees and unzipped it. Ken pulled it open, and I gazed inside. It's full, I announced, turning back to Jenny, Tony, and Carly. His clothes, they're all here. Huh? What does that mean? Carly cried. It means he drove off without his stuff, Tony replied, walking over to peer in the bag. Maybe he was so crazed, so messed up after killing Dara, he didn't even think of taking his bag. Maybe, I replied doubtfully. Or maybe it means that... The words caught in my throat. A heavy feeling of dread crept up from my stomach. Maybe it means that Josh was murdered too, Ken finished my thought for me. He turned the bag over and dumped everything onto the floor. We sifted through it quickly. Just clothes, an extra sweater, a ski outfit, gray sweatpants, a small bag containing a toothbrush, deodorant, tissues, and a comb. Nothing the least bit interesting. I jumped to my feet. I climbed onto the lower bed and examined the top bunk. The blanket was smooth and tucked in tightly at the sides. Nothing up here, I reported. I really don't think he ever was in this bed. I lowered myself to the floor. I guess we should check out Dara's room too, I told them. Every time I said Dara's name, I pictured her stiff, frozen body, her blue face, twisted in pain and horror, the hatchet buried so deep in her shoulder blades. We made our way silently to Dara's room. In the hallway next to Dara's door, I stopped in front of a low wicker table. The table contained a slender blue vase filled with pink and purple dried wildflowers. Beside it stood a framed photograph. It showed Dara, a few years younger, in a bright yellow ski outfit. Her mother and father, also in bright ski outfits, stood behind her, smiling into the camera. The 3 of them looked so happy. Gazing at the photo, I almost burst into tears. Biting my lower lip, I forced myself to turn away from the happy family in the photograph and stepped into Dara's bedroom. Ken clicked on a tall lamp beside the bed, and we began to look around. Posters of Olympic skiers lined one wall. Shelves along the opposite wall were crammed with books and old magazines, board games, tapes, and CDs. The bed was covered in a black and white checkered quilt. Beside the bed stood an oak nightstand. A paperback book lay open, pages down. Beside the book, I spotted a folded-up sheet of white paper. Ken pulled open the door to the closet and peered in. The others were examining the cluttered shelves. I picked up the sheet of paper, unfolded it, and read it quickly. Oh, I don't believe it, I cried. The paper trembled in my hand. Everyone turned back to me. I know who killed Dara, I said. Chapter 14. They clustered around, and I read the letter out loud. It was written in red ballpoint. The handwriting was sloppy, hard to read, hurried. There were red smudges where the ink had leaked. I held the page under the lamp and began to read in a soft, trembling voice. Dear Dara, I can't go on like this any more. No matter how cruel you are to me, I always take it. You humiliated me tonight. How could you? I always thought you were someone worth caring about. But I guess I made a big mistake. But I have to talk to you one more time. I won't take no for an answer. Meet me at midnight. Alone. Josh. Jenny grabbed a letter from my hand and read it again quickly. Ken and Carly read it over Jenny's shoulder. When Jenny handed the letter back to me, her face had gone pale. Her normally dark lips were white. Her chin trembled. We have to get out of here? She cried. Jenny, why? I asked, folding the letter carefully. Well, don't you see? Jenny asked impatiently. He'll remember he wrote this letter. Josh will remember it. He'll turn around. He'll come back here. And he'll kill us all because we read it? Because we know? She began sobbing loudly again. Jenny, I said softly. I reached out to comfort her, but she took off, running past me into the hall. Jenny! I kept calling her name as I jogged after her, into the kitchen. She picked up the phone receiver. She started frantically punching numbers. Come on, come on, come on, she cried, punching the numbers harder and harder. You've got to work. You've got to! She slams the dead receiver against the wall. I moved quickly to her and wrapped her in a hug. Her entire body was trembling. Jenny, I whispered, we'll be okay. Really, we'll be okay. Josh will come back, she sobbed. He'll come back and murder us all just like Dara? I glanced over my shoulder to see Ken, Tony, and Carly entering the kitchen. We've got to stay calm, Ken warned, coming over to Jenny and me, his blue eyes locked on Jenny. We can't panic, Jenny. It won't help us. We have to stay calm so we can think clearly. He's going to come back? Jenny cried. I could see she had totally lost it. I felt so helpless. What could I do to calm her down? I was just as frightened as Jenny, and I was just as worried that Josh might remember the letter and come back for it. But we couldn't leave the house. The snow was too deep and coming down too hard. The winds were freezing and nearly strong enough to blow us over. We had no car, no phone, no neighbors. We were trapped. Jenny had every right to be frightened. Hey, there might be a gun in the house, Tony declared. His words snapped me back from my frightening thoughts. Excuse me? I asked, turning to him. He finished his Coke and crushed a can in his hand. Did anyone see a gun anywhere in the house? Dara's dad used to keep a pistol here. I wonder if he still does. We should protect ourselves, in case Josh comes back. I stared blankly at Tony. I couldn't believe he wanted to find a gun. Did he know anything about guns? I wasn't sure I wanted Tony to have a gun. I realized I still didn't trust him. He hadn't really done anything wrong. Call it a hunch. I just didn't trust him. I haven't seen a gun anywhere, Ken told him. Maybe we should look for it, Tony replied. Tony, please, Carly pleaded. She had dropped down next to Jenny at the table and had been holding Jenny's hand, trying to calm her. What's your problem? Tony snapped at her. Don't you think I know how to use a gun? Aren't things scary enough, Tony? Carly cried. Why make it even more frightening? Tony scowled and walked into the living room. I could hear him moving around in there, pulling out drawers, opening cabinets. I hoped he didn't find a gun. Jenny turned to me, tears rolling down her cheeks, her chin still quivering. Do you think Josh would come back to get his letter? She asked. I really don't know, I told her. Outside the glass door, Dara, covered by snow, seemed to stare in at us, and the snow continued to fall. I knew I wouldn't be able to get to sleep that night, and I was right. Lying in bed with the blankets pulled up to my throat, I tried reading, but I had brought only a scary thriller to read, and I wasn't exactly in the mood for a thriller. Every sound in the house, every shift of the wind made my heart skip a beat. It had been such a long, dreadful day. The hours had stretched on until they seemed like weeks. We were all tense, frightened, upset. We had pulled Dara's frozen body into the garage, out of sight, but I still saw her blue, snow-covered face, her blank, staring eyes every time I thought about her. I settled my head into the pillow and shut my eyes. I concentrated on relaxing my body. Every muscle seemed hard and tight. I concentrated on relaxing my foot muscles, then my leg muscles. I breathed slowly, steadily. Calm, April. Calm. Calm, I kept telling myself, trying to soothe myself to sleep. I had nearly drifted off when I heard the creak of the floorboards, the sound of footsteps in the living room. My entire body went rigid. I had to force myself to breathe. I listened hard. Yes, someone had entered the living room. Someone was moving slowly, quietly. Someone didn't want to be heard. The creaking floorboards gave him away. I forced myself to take another breath. I gripped the blankets with both hands, squeezed until my hands hurt. Josh is back, I realized. Josh has come back. come back to kill the rest of us? Chapter 15. Shivering, I lowered my feet to the floor. I crept out of bed and pulled on my robe. I struggled to breathe normally. It felt as if my heart had leaped into my throat. I made my way out into the dark hall and listened. Silence. Then a single creaking footstep. I saw a glimmer of light from the living room. Did Josh have a flashlight? As my eyes adjusted to the dark hallway, I searched for a weapon. Anything I could use to protect myself. I spotted a ski pole propped against the wall near the corner. I picked it up, gripping the handle tightly in my cold, clammy hand. Will it protect me against Josh? I wondered. Yes, if I take him by surprise. I crept quickly down the dark hallway, keeping my back pressed against the wall. I suddenly felt cold all over, as if my fear had frozen my skin. I stopped just outside the living room doorway, struggling to catch my breath. I leaned into the doorway and peered into the room. Where is he? I wondered. I heard him moving around in here. I stared into the darkness, my eyes darting around the room. I took a cautious step away from the wall. He moved so quickly I couldn't cry out, couldn't resist. I felt him beside me, hidden in the deep shadows. And then he leaped forward, grabbed me, and pulled me roughly into the darkness with him.